live streaming, and we do. Councillor Loden, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Hello, that's a lovely moonscape, or is that the Earth?
I need to change my background, sorry.
Okay, I believe we're now live streaming, so I'll start the meeting and declare the meeting open at 6 o'clock. And start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. Welcome back everybody after a recess in January. Good to see you all, and welcome to the council briefing of the 1st of February 2022. Welcome to members of the public in our public gallery this evening. We have all council members in attendance, with Councillor Loden attending via Zoom. So I will then go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. Just in terms of being in the chamber, we do ask that you wear a mask while you're not speaking, but when you do approach the microphone, you are welcome to remove your mask. If you would feel more comfortable, we do have a wipes and hand sanitizer at the podium. And when you come forward, we just ask that you state your name, the suburb in which you reside, and the item which you are speaking on. You do have up to 3 minutes to speak, and it is then free to go. So would you like to come forward, Mark, and make your statement? Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and City Executive. My name is Mark Furr. I'm General Manager, Youth, Community and Leisure for the YMCA WA. And I'm here to talk to a submission regarding agenda item 7.7. The YWA values its relationship with the City of Vincent and is keen to continue to partner with the City to deliver on its Youth Action Plan 2020 to 2022. A 3-year recurrent funding commitment of $50,000 per year is requested for consideration by the City of Vincent. This is opposed to the YWA pursuing annual community grants, which has long been the undertaking by the YWA for many years previous. This request is submitted due to long-term partnering and support between the two organisations and the positive relationship that has ensued and the social capital that has developed as a consequence. As a committed member of the City of Vincent community, recurrent funding would enable a more effective strategic approach to planning and service delivery by the YWA that will be more assured and impactful for young people in the City of Vincent in accordance with the City's Youth Action Plan. The YWA is a preventative organisation. We work with all young people to prevent crisis and support them to recognise and fulfil their potential. We work with young people aged 11 to 25 and are inclusive of all cultures and abilities. Our youth work starts where young people are at, with a focus on developing leadership, supporting physical and mental activity and well-being, learning to learn, exploring self-identity and fostering connection and belonging. In engaging young people at HQ Leaderville to date, the YWA has delivered an approach to youth work that is aligned to the City of Vincent Youth Action Plan and has ensured the centre is a vibrant hub of youth-focused activities, providing a safe space and programming that supports and benefits young people in the City of Vincent, whether they are merely surviving, functioning, aspiring, or even thriving. The Y has presented an application which is focused on supporting young people from Vincent via youth engagement and development activities, and all work to support these young people is aligned to the City of Vincent's plan. In particular, focus area 1, support and opportunity, area 2, community and participation, wellbeing and resilience being focus area 3. The YWA HQ Leaderville will support community and participation by providing a range of opportunities, including access to all of our services facility from HQ. Working alongside these young people, community members and stakeholders, the aim is to improve mental, physical, emotional well-being, developing life skills, supporting and developing community leaders, developing active citizens and increasing a sense of connection and belonging, reducing levels of vandalism and antisocial behaviour, celebrating and promoting the diversity of the community. And can I please take this opportunity to thank the Council for its consideration in this matter. Thank you very much.
Almost perfect timing, Mark. Well done. Thank
Thank you, Mayor.
you. That's great submission. Appreciate you coming in and speaking to us on that item. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer Highgate, and speaking on 6-1 and Monmouth Street Pocket Park. I'm speaking about the lost opportunity to engage and involve the local community in providing facilities that they need and for which we pay rates. We've got 3 new councillors and the report doesn't give a complete history, so I'll just quickly go through that. In 1968, the City of Perth moved to compulsorily acquire the lot in order to create a playground. Since then, nothing's really been done apart from planting some trees and some grass. When the trees blew over in the storm, they weren't replaced by the Vincent staff. The local community has used the park as best they can for family gatherings, dog exercise, and as a play area, albeit without any facilities. About 20 months ago, the admin proposed selling the block. The idea was advertised, the community pushed back, and the council decided not to sell. The council also asked the CEO to consult with the local community about enhancements, and $10,000 was subsequently put on the budget, even though the community hadn't yet been asked what enhancements they'd like to see. Last September, the council adopted a new stakeholder engagement policy. It had all the motherhood statements you'd expect from such a policy, but importantly, it established levels of participation ranging from inform, to consult, to involve, to collaborate. The last 2 being focused on getting real input from stakeholders, rather than just asking their opinion. The Monmouth Street Pocket Park seems like an ideal pilot project to develop protocols and processes around involving and collaborating with the community. It's a small project with a small stakeholder group. It's not complex, and it could potentially result in a great pocket park, just like the one in Hyde Street, not too far away. So what did the admin do? They presented 2 options without first asking the community what they'd like to see. Option 1 had a lot of gravel and a single seat. Option 2 had grass, 2 seats and some trees. So it was a no-brainer. People obviously went for the least worst alternative. And I realise the staff are going to claim that there was some input about facilities when the proposal to sell the block was advertised. That wasn't what people were asked about. They were simply asked, do you want to sell it or not? A few people said, oh, what about playground equipment, etc. If you look at the submissions in attachment 1, you'll see basically people asked which option they preferred. They weren't, and also for some comments, they weren't asked, what would you like to see? When people actually made suggestions, the response was, there's no budget. And that's because the budget was set when the basis for the work was going to be spreading some gravel and putting in a single seat. It's also galling when you see there was no problem finding an extra $42,000 to demolish the Bank's Reserve Hall. What I'd suggest is some face-to-face engagement, get people involved in a non-bureaucratic and engaging way. Don't just send a tick-the-box survey. Ask them what they'd like to see, develop some alternatives and some indicative budgets. Go out there and meet the people face-to-face. It's been done before and it worked really well. So I'd ask council to defer this and request the staff involve and engage the community, not just consult using a second-rate questionnaire. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudley. I'm just going to check with Executive Manager of Governance whether we did receive any written questions in advance of the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. We did receive a written question and statements from Andrew Main in respect to the item on tonight's agenda, item 511, in respect to the local government reforms. Would you like me to?
Given that it's been received by all council members, I'm just trying to recall whether we are reading out statements if they've been issued to council members. I think, can you just remind me?
The practice in the last few meetings is not to be reading them out.
Yeah, okay. Has everybody received the statement from Andrew Main and had the opportunity to read it? Okay, then we'll take that as read. Thank you very much, Executive Manager. Yep, okay. All right, well, I'll close public question time and move to item 4, declarations of interest. CEO.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I received a declaration of interest from Councillor Castle in relation to item 5.1, a proximity interest noting that Councillor Castle's property is adjacent to the portion of Kalgoorlie Street being proposed for character retention. Councillor Castle is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in the chambers or vote on the matter.
Thank you, CEO. Anything further? Councillors, any late declarations of interest on any items before you this evening? No? Okay. All right. So we'll move to taking questions on the items before us. And we will deal with the two items that were raised by members of the public gallery first. So the first item was 7.7, 3-year funding agreement for the YWA. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just under the sustainability implications, it refers to this item potentially having negative environmental impacts, which I suspect would be negligible. But can we please get some more information on the requirements that are established for recipients of a city community grant in relation to sustainability, reconciliation and public health? And in the briefing notes is fine.
Yeah. Thanks, Mayor Cole. I'll respond to that in the briefing notes.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, we shall move on then to item 6.1, Monmouth Street Reserve Eco Zoning Results of Consultation. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wondering if you're able to point me to the specific policy and clause that requires a jacaranda tree to be planted on the verge.
Through Nicole. Off the top of my head, I can't point you to a specific policy that says that, but I can take the question on notice and put some information in the briefing notes.
Anything further? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. I guess, does admin have a view on whether we have under budgeted this and whether a better outcome could be achieved for slightly more, hopefully, money?
Through Nicole, I believe the $10,000 was already budgeted. There was at least one report to council, and council resolved that that was the budget to be allocated, and we worked to that budget. I mean, it is a very small park, so we were comfortable with that allocation, and we've worked, to that total essentially.
Councillors, any questions on Monmouth Street? I'm just trying to go back to the report, so you can bear with me for a moment. It's a $10,000 broken down against the plantings, the wood chip, the seat. Could we have perhaps in the briefing notes a little bit more detail in how that $10,000 has been allocated?
Yeah, through Nicole, I can do that. It's not in the report. It's not broken down, but I can do it.
Great, that'd be appreciated. Thanks. Councillor Warner.
Hi, is it possible to include the possibility of dog disposal bins and more seating? I understand the budget is tight, but are we able to work that into it at all?
And through Nicole, I'll check that.
It'd be good to have those items costed, Director, so then we can actually see if there's a will to put in a dog bag dispenser, what then that would mean would have to come out.
Yes, my call to give you a fuller answer. What I'll do is I'll get those figures and I'll put them in the report, and I'll make reference to whether the budget would allow that to happen or not.
Thank you. Any further questions on Monmouth Street? Oh, sorry, Councillor Loden, yes.
Just on the topic of waste collection, can we also make sure we include the ongoing costs of?
We're not hearing you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
No, unfortunately not. How are we going to do this?
I'll write a comment.
We're just checking, Councillor Loden. We might have to get you to do a 1-2. Is that working, Dan?
Hello, I can hear you.
Can we include?
The ongoing cost of waste collection as well.
It needs to be mic'd though. Can anyone mic that question? It's not going to work though for the meeting. We do need a solution.
Mayor Cole, one of my staff said they can hear him online. It's just we've got an issue at this end, I think.
Okay, so Councillor Loden, you can be heard online, but for some reason we can't hear you here. So maybe Maybe we'll tune into you online. If you just give us 1 more minute to try to resolve this.
Hey, David.
Question?
Can we include the ongoing
cost of waste collection as well into consideration?
Through my call, I can do that.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll now go to the beginning of the agenda and work through the items sequentially that we haven't already dealt with. So item 5.1 under strategy and development, advertising of amended character areas and heritage areas policy, Wilberforce and Kalgoorlie streets. Questions? Thank you, Councillor Castle. Just noting Councillor Castle's left on a proximity interest. So are there any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Thanks, Mayor. Just considering a couple of the ones some of us have seen lately where, you know, fences can only be 1.6 metres and administration has approved 1.8 metres. And then at Moyer Street, you know, the overshadowing has been approved and they, I understood, had the toughest heritage laws that you can get. So what's going to be different with these ones? Are we going to decide to keep the character, which is the intent of this, and then do they gradually get usurped? What will be the difference?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the process for these character retention areas will be the same as the process that you've outlined. There's a set of design principles, which are really the basis objectives for the area, which are the basis for both assessments. And then there's a set of deemed to comply standards that if you've met those, then there's no discretion that needs to be exercised by the decision maker. So a 1.6 metre fence in previous cases will be a deemed to comply standard. You meet that, you're fine. If you want to propose something different, then you need to meet those objectives. And so it really comes down to that, the discretion that's applied around whether the design that doesn't meet those deemed to comply standards is appropriate and meets those objectives or not. So that's the same approach that's being proposed here that occurs everywhere. That's the system that is set out in the West Australian planning system. And so really it comes down to the design principles. I think the difficulty is those design principles are set by the state government in the R codes. And so it really comes down to the definition that we have of what the character of that street is. And so we've got a definition of that in this policy. And if it meets that definition, a new development that is, then it would be considered appropriate.
So largely it can be challenged. Yeah.
In the same way that any planning framework can has discretion involved, but this is adding additional requirements to enhance the character.
Yeah, okay. And then so then it gets down to coming to council and whether council approves it or not. And then at some stage, if they don't like it, they can take it to the state government, can they?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that's correct. I think the difference between having a character area
to
not
the State Administrative Tribunal.
State Administrative Tribunal.
All right. No, I get it. Thanks very much, Tony.
Excuse me for a moment, Councillor Apollo. Councillor Loden, we're just wanting to see if we've got audio with you now.
Can you hear me?
That's a no.
No.
We will keep trying. Councillor Apollo.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a clarification question. So this agenda item is specifically calling out the Wilberforce and Kalgoorlie streets heritage and character area and heritage area policy. Why are we considering this in isolation versus the whole thing?
Yes, through Mayor Cole. The City of Vincent has a character and heritage area policy. And in that policy, it states that if a street or an area of houses gets together and puts an application to the city for their street to become a character area and to have this extra layer of protection, if you like, or extra layer of requirement, then the city will consider that. So in this case, members of the community got together and they put this application forward. I think it's 40% of the street. If 40% of that area signs onto that and puts the application forward, then the city will consider it.
So just a follow-up question, if I may. So this is just for them to come into this within the sphere of character and heritage, rather than a specific character and heritage for these two streets.
Through Mayor Cole, so it's a specific one for these two streets. So once the application is put forward, gets considered by administration, the city does an assessment of the street and the character of that street to understand what character elements it has, what the history, and the heritage, the character heritage of that street is. If it's a consistent character that's of value, then administration will recommend that be protected through a set of a set of objectives and provisions in a policy, and council will consider that, advertise it, and then from there, those submissions get considered and council makes a decision about whether the policy should be adopted or not. Thank you.
Councillors. Director, one thing I just wanted to inquire about is the way this will be communicated to residents. Just have we sort of learned from previous communications where we perhaps mentioned things like heritage areas when it wasn't applicable? Are we able to define very clearly? I've looked at the material that's included in the report, which is good, really good, but in terms of taking that to a more user-friendly step, are we able to define how this is different to what's already in place so that's very clear about what people are potentially having applied in addition to the existing planning framework?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I think we have learnt a lot through probably the last 3 policy changes policy streetscapes we've advertised to. I think the last round council adopted late last year, I think it was in December. We'd learnt a lot, and that process I think ran very smoothly. We went actually out to everybody's house individually and had a chat to them about what was being proposed, and we didn't confuse people with the heritage versus character thing. So I think this is clearly a character retention area. That's what will be explained to people. It's not about heritage protection or restricting the ability for people to demolish and redevelop and add things. So confuse people with the heritage versus character.
It's a bit disturbing when that happens, isn't it,
This is clearly a character retention area.
It's happened to me a few times.
People, it's not about heritage protection or restricting the ability for people to demolish and redevelop.
You can self-assess the advice that you've just provided. It's a bit disturbing when that happens, isn't it, Director? It's happened to me a few times. There you go. Should have been silent.
Restricting the ability for people to demolish and redevelop.
You can self-assess the advice that you've just provided. It's a bit disturbing when that happens, isn't it, Director? It's happened to me a few times. There you go. Should have been silent. You can self-assess the advice that you've just provided. It's disturbing when that happens, isn't it? It's happened to me a few times. There you go. Should have been silent. You can self-assess the advice that you've just provided. It's disturbing when that happens, isn't it? It's happened to me a few times. There you go. Should have been silent. You can self-assess the advice that you've provided. It's disturbing when that happens, isn't it? It's happened to me a few times. There you go. Been silent. You can self-assess using your advice providers. There you go. Okay, we think that we're okay now. Councillor Loden, given our technical difficulties this evening, and apologies to all for that who are tuning in, we are going to have to phone you on your mobile when we need to speak to you, and hopefully sort this out for the AGM tomorrow. Okay, where were we? Yes, I had one further question on this item. Are we going to invite residents to a street meeting or to provide the opportunity for that to happen?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice. That's my understanding, that we'd be carrying out a workshop, but I'll take that notice and confirm exactly what we're proposing to do in the process.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions on character? Okay, item 5.2, outcomes of advertising, amendment number 7 to local planning scheme number 2, Leederville precinct structure plan. Councillor Ifill.
Thank you, Mayor. Can administration please direct council to the explanation in this brief of why a new zoning category is necessary within the local planning scheme number 2 so that the Leederville precinct structure plan can be implemented?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can explain it very briefly. So the Leederville Activities Centre or Precinct Structure Plan, Leederville Precinct Structure Plan, sets out zonings and land use permissibility. The scheme also sets out zonings and land use permissibility. So at the moment, there's an inconsistency between the two documents. And in the case of inconsistencies, the scheme prevails. So the scheme provisions will be the provisions that need to be applied. So the only way for the structure plan to be implemented is if the zonings in the scheme are changed to align with the structure plan.
So we're talking about the centre zone. So what are the, I guess what I'm trying to understand is what are the shortcomings as it pertains to the LSPS of the existing designation of local centre, district centre and regional centre, and basically, because these have been in place since 2018 and before that in local planning scheme number 1 since 1998. So I'm trying to understand why the existing categories of local, district, regional centre need to be superseded by a new category.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, it's simply because they're inconsistent with the precinct structure plan that council's just adopted late last year. So they're different. And as a result of that difference, we need to try and make sure there's consistency and that the most recent decision of council is applied. I mean, there are specifically some shortcomings or some differences, and I can set some of those out in the briefing notes so that you understand exactly what's changed between the two.
So my follow-up to that is because the resolution that's attached to this briefing says, so my question, ask the question, why is a change recommended when the resolution to the amendment states that this amendment, A, will have minimal impact on the area, B, will not alter the existing build form requirements of the subject site, C, will not alter the urban zoning under the metropolitan scheme, and D, will otherwise not result in any environmental, social or economic impact.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The rationale for all of that is that the structure plan has been adopted by council. And so this decision doesn't change that decision around the structure plan being adopted. So the structure plan applies and determines the built form outcomes. The scheme really just determines the land use permissibility. That's it. It doesn't determine how high the buildings can be, what the plot ratio is, what the setbacks are. All of that is determined by the structure plan that council adopted late last year. So the reason why this scheme amendment doesn't impact any of those things is because all it does is remove land use permissibility from the scheme and ensure the structure plan's land use permissibility applies.
So if I take an example, if the existing build form and urban zoning remains unchanged within the scheme map, referring to page 13 and 14 of the LSPS, households currently zoned residential R80 could either now be designated as suburban type A or suburban type B, which have different heights. But the rationale for this is saying that the build form requirements and the zoning is unchanged. So is there a third facet that the existing local planning scheme doesn't allow for, which the leadable precinct plan does?
Yes, through Mayor Cole. So if the scheme isn't changed and it's left as it is, the structure plan will still be applicable, and the built form and heights set in the structure plan will apply. The scheme doesn't set heights. It simply sets the land use permissibility and in some cases the R code. Once you get to R80, the R code really is just dependent on what heights are permissible, right? So the structure plan applies the heights and there will be no change if to the built form provisions if the scheme isn't changed. What will be different is the land use permissibility between the two documents. So the scheme will set so cafe, for instance, might be prohibited in a particular part of the leadable downtown centre. But under the structure plan, council and the community have come to a view that it should be permissible in this precinct. And so changing the scheme is essential to allow a cafe to go into that area.
So I think I got my answer. So just to clarify, so the change is an administrative one, and it's mainly to cover permissible land use changes in line with the precinct plan and heights which are prescribed now under the leadable plan but aren't under the Local Planning Act. Local planning scheme.
Through you, Mayor Cole. The first part, that's correct. The heights already apply. And so this scheme amendment is not essential. There's no administrative need to change it for heights, just for land use permissibility.
So the question about parks and recreation on the same subject. So can administration please clarify the implications of the areas currently zoned parks and recreation and public open spaces now become part of the scheme map designated centre? And so does this actually mean that parks and recreation and public open spaces can now be built in a different way because it's under this umbrella of urban centre?
Through you, Mayor Cole. We've got a bit of an anomaly in the current scheme when it comes to parks and recreation. So all of those areas that are reserved for parks and recreation under the scheme are already reserved under the Metropolitan Region scheme as parks and recreation. And so our scheme has no ability to apply any requirements to that land. It's state government, Metropolitan Region scheme controls that land. And so it remains as parks and recreation under the MRS, and the same provisions apply. So it's an administrative change to fix an anomaly that's been in the scheme for a while.
And I guess that answers my next question, which was, are our sustainability ratios and public open space commitments, as discussed in the strategic community plan, is unaffected by this changing of this classification of open spaces under this new proposed change?
Through Mayor Cole, that's correct. There's no change.
But one more question, two more questions, sorry, if I may. There was, in relation to the community engagement piece, there were 6 responses. Did the community engagement, which resulted in those 6 responses, substantially include materially the same information as what is contained in our brief?
through you, Mayor Cole, I will have to check what the community consultation information included, but in short, it was it's attachment 1 would have been included. So if that's your question, attachment 1 was included, and I can find out what other information was included. There certainly would have been a link to the structure plan, so the community and those consulted would understand what was being proposed, but I can confirm that in the briefing notes.
And my last question, and thanks for bearing with me. The response from the Water Corp is interesting. Is it possible to receive the full response received by the Water Corporation, including the context for its comments that the reclassification of land to centre does not provide a level of detail to comment?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we can provide the Water Corp's submission in the briefing notes. But in short, the reason that they're saying that is because they're interested in the structure plan. They're not interested in this kind of a administrative change, because that doesn't mean anything to them when it comes to planning for water, reticulation, sewer. They're interested in the structure plan, the densities, the heights, the amount of floor space, those kinds of things, so they can plan their infrastructure network. So that would be the rationale for that comment, that then they're simply not interested in this kind of thing, but we have to send it to them because it's a statutory requirement.
Just to clarify then, they've obviously got the Leederville precinct structure plan, so they have all that information, but you're saying their comment about not being able to comment on it is in relation to the resolution itself? Because they're just saying that there's not enough information about what this change means from their perspective.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. I'm not sure why they've said that. They put a submission on the precinct structure plan. So they were consulted on that. They put a submission on it. We put together an infrastructure report around it to explain what would be how their infrastructure net would be impacted, and they supported that. And it's going to the WAPC, and they'll have another opportunity to comment through that process as well. So the reason, I don't know why they've made this comment here, other than to say, I think they have nothing to say about this because it's an administrative change, and it doesn't actually change anything further than what the structure plan's already changed.
Director, isn't it the case that the questions they asked are answered in the structure plan?
That's correct.
Councillors? Any further questions? Director, just on that issue of public open space being in the MRS, the one piece of public open space that wouldn't be in the MRS is the section that was brought forward as an amendment by Councillor Gondaszewski. Could you just give some feedback on that and whether that perhaps should have been considered as that the land use for that particular area being included?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, you're correct. The rationale for not including it in the scheme is that it's included in the structure plan. And that's how we've approached the entire structure plan and every other part of the zoning and reservation that applies. So it would be treating that piece differently to everything else. So our view is that everything should be centre zone. The structure plan prevails. If council wants to change something in the structure plan, they can do that. And then we wouldn't have to also do a scheme amendment at the same time. So it simplifies the process, but shouldn't take any or doesn't take any control away from council when making decisions around development.
Perhaps also isn't as high a bar to remove that POS in the future. Would you agree?
No, it wouldn't be as high. Well, it would still require approval of council and the commission.
Okay.
It wouldn't require approval of the minister. So that'd be the difference. The minister for planning wouldn't be involved.
Yeah, it still would go to the WA Planning Commission. Okay.
That's correct.
That's good. All right, thank you, Director. Any further questions on the scheme amendment? Okay, thank you. Moving on then to item 5.3, public open space strategy implementation progress update. Questions on this item? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. There's some talk at the top of the report about the land utilisation policy. Could we just get some more detail around the schedule for that, a workshop and when council will be involved in its development?
Yes, through Mayor Cole. I understand it was workshop with council last year, November maybe, but I'll provide that information in the briefing notes.
I'd also like to add to that support for that question. Given that it's talking about it being developed in 22-23, it would be good to have a clearer idea whether that would be early in the financial year, particularly given there's a lot of linkages to that first step before other actions can follow. Do councillors have any other questions on this item? I do have a few, but I'll go to you first. Councillor Alexander.
I wonder if you could just explain to me I understand the philosophy that, you know, people need more open space if they don't have it, but how do we go about finding it, paying for it, you know, because everything has a cost. And I presume if you happen to be in an area, you bought a house and then someone comes along and produces some public open space, that certainly wouldn't hurt the value of your property. So for me, I understand why you need a public open space, but I don't fully understand how you go about finding it and paying for it.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I agree. And I don't think, I don't have the answer to that question. That's something that we'll need to work through with council and the community as we develop this plan. So yeah, we don't currently have a policy or a strategy for finding those pieces of land. And that's something that needs to be developed as is set out in this report. Because, you know, I have a belief that there needs to be sort of equity in some of these sorts of things. And I understand with 1% for apartments and all those things that the City of Vincent, you know, banks some of that money because the developers don't wish to put the public art in place. But that money can only be spent in the area where the apartments are. Now, I think if we're prepared to go for public open space, which may increase...
Councillor Alexander, just to reflect, is this a question or are you making a statement?
Bit of both, but I can address that at some other time.
For statements for next week, but questions for now. But perhaps just in response to that question, I think also what the public open space strategy is seeking to do is to map out how we answer some of those questions, Councillor Alexander. And one of those steps is to look at land utilisation and then a land acquisition policy. But the public open space implementation plan also talks about things like creatively using road reserve, looking at land swaps and doing other improvements to our public open space where we may have buildings on it, for example, at Haynes Street, where we're removing the buildings to release that public open space back for recreational use. So not all elements of the public open space strategy are linked to purchasing land outright. Some of it is about those other methods. Councillors, Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Key action, I think it's 18, might have been cut off. Prepare and implement a local water management strategy and prepare an urban water management plan. Doesn't have under tasks preparation of an urban water management plan. Am I missing it there? Are we intending to produce an urban water management plan? My understanding of them, they're generally for greenfield subdivision, and I'm skeptical about their application to Vincent.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, you're correct. We're not proposing to develop a plan as such. We have the overarching strategy and we're dealing with those issues as we need to. And so we believe that that's achieving the intent of that action. I don't think the action wasn't written in the context of the technical wording of those documents. The overall intent was that we would have a strategy and we would implement individual plans on an as-needs basis.
Okay, I think the capitalisation of urban water management plans suggests slightly different, but I agree with the general intent of your statement. I have one more, sorry, while I've got the microphone. Under community gardens, there was a task to determine the key locations for community gardens and to consider their development during public open space projects. That kind of jibed with our response to the community question about community garden on Monmouth Street, which our response to that was they need to be developed and driven by the community. So I'm just, that task says it's underway. I just wanted to clarify that it's still our policy that during the development of public open space, that's something that we are considering, or do we need to alter that task?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, it certainly is something we're considering, but we're considering it. We're trying to be prudent about it, because if we create a community garden that doesn't have adequate community support, then it won't be successful. And so I guess the comment in relation to the Monmouth Street item is that it's certainly something we would consider if the community has got together and created a very strong, robust group that's going to be managing that garden. The same occurred when we were developing the Robinson Park development plan, and we've been working closely with the community on that.
Okay, so our consideration is limited to listening to community requests, really.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the community needs to take ownership of that space, so it needs to come and be driven by the community. One individual person suggesting that a community garden would be a nice thing to have isn't enough. We need to work together with the community to come up with an approach that will be sustainable for the long term.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Warner.
With reference to the Woodville Reserve Master Plan, that's currently delayed. Forgive my ignorance, but when is that likely to get back on track? Because my speaking with the North Perth Tennis Club is they're very keen to know about their future lease, and they're expecting to hear something towards the end of last year, and they're very keen to know where they stand, basically.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. The plan is that would be completed in 24-25 under this approach.
Are they likely to hear more about their lease, though, in the meantime?
Yes, they will.
Can I also just add that because that was delayed, we have moved to do a much more simple landscape plan, which has been approved at the December meeting. And as part of that, the North Perth Tennis Club provided part of their leasing area back to the City of Vincent. And we are moving forward with a leasing agreement with the North Perth Tennis Club. There has been a subject of discussions, and have attended meetings. My understanding is that we're still negotiating somewhere between 3 to 5 years with the club. But it would be good to get a response in the briefing notes as to the status of those negotiations. Councillors? Okay, I'll just ask my questions if I might, Director. Wait for you to stop writing. Okay, I've just gone through the table. I have a few things just to note. Happy for you to take them on notice. I wondered whether we could include the establishment of the Pos Reserve as an item that has been completed, is my understanding. And that does have sale funds sitting in it from the Vincent and Charles Street, small slithers of what appeared to be road reserve sitting in it. So I think that would be something that should be captured here.
Yes, we can include that, definitely.
Thank you. Also wondered whether under the section dealing with the effectiveness of converting road reserves, section 7, whether that could mention the Grosvenor Road trial funding.
Yes, we can look at that inclusion as well.
Also wondered under section 17, where it talks about review of pesticides and fertilisers on city parks and reserves, whether a more comprehensive response could be included there, that given it's a community interest issue.
Yes, we can speak to the Parks team about that and add some information.
Thank you. Also just had a question about the implementation of the Woodville Reserve Landscape Plan. I just mentioned it talks about that being implemented in 22-23. My question is, was that not 21-22? That's under item 13.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that's the implementation.
Yes, but I thought the implementation was going to happen as soon as we had good weather, April.
I'll take that on notice and clarify with the team. Thanks.
Thank you. That was all. Thanks, Director. Any further questions on this item? Okay, thanks everyone. Next item is 5.4 draft smoke-free areas and draft smoke-free areas and smoke-free areas. Should I just say draft smoke-free areas? Education and enforcement policy. Thanks for joining us, Manager. Any questions on this item? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'm just wondering if we can have or will be getting at some stage some more detail on what we actually plan to do by way of education and awareness. Will there be an operational description of what that project will entail?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, we'll be reporting this project back to the April council meeting where we can provide that detail.
Thank you. And in the policy, it refers to the first 6 months, the focus is on a transition phasing with the focus on education and awareness, and that enforcement won't begin until after that 6 months. Is it the intention that the education and awareness project will continue beyond the 6 months, or it will only be for that initial stage?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the focus is on education throughout. So if we look at item 1.2 of the policy, it says the implementation of smoke-free areas is to focus on education and awareness primarily. So that would be the primary aspect of the project.
Okay. And so will that detail that we're getting in April set out how those phases might look different in terms of education? So perhaps the first 6 months might be more intensive than beyond, and how that is planned to be rolled out?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct.
Councillors. Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Just in relation to the reference in section 2.2 of the education and enforcement policy around alternative places to smoke, that talks about alternative places to smoke being available and would be well lit. Can I just clarify, are these alternative spaces just sort of spaces that are outside the smoke-free areas, and that essentially some of the smoke-free area boundaries have been designed so that or, you know, shortened, etc., so that we're not pushing people too far outside this town centre? Or is the city intending on identifying specific alternative spaces that may be appropriate and keeping them on a list somewhere that can be, you know, advised to people if they have it, need assistance?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, our Rangers team and public health team have actually done walkthroughs all of the town centres and assessed these sorts of spaces that are like what we would expect in a normal main street in a town centre. They would be very close to the main street. So we are just considering that safety aspect as well. So we do have our separate pieces of information that we use in the background to inform businesses and members of the community around where those safe spaces are.
Okay, but from an enforcement policy, as long as you're not smoking in a smoke-free area, you're good to go. Yeah,
that is correct.
Okay. The only other question I had in relation to the section 3.3 and 3.4 of the enforcement policy is that section 3.3 talks about the public interest of pursuing an enforcement, and then 3.4 references public interest factors, and it talks about the age, health or vulnerability of a victim or witness in relation to considerations around pursuing enforcement. And I'm just wondering, is this referring to victim or witness of someone smoking in a smoke-free area, or is it this potentially referring to the person that would be the subject of the enforcement action.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. Thank you for picking that up. I'll just double check the wording for that and provide further advice in the briefing notes.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. There appears to be a submission from a William Street business in opposition to having their alfresco area being smoke-free, although it's my understanding that alfresco areas on city land are already required to be smoke-free. Is that correct? And has the city provided this feedback to them, and what was the response?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. Last month, we sent out general guidance to all businesses on existing requirements, including the Tobacco Products Control Act. And we also provided targeted advice to particular businesses, including that said business. It is correct. It isn't covered within our own outdoor eating area framework. It is covered within the Tobacco Products Control Act. You can't smoke within 5 metres of an entrance or 10 metres of an air conditioning intake, which would render most footpaths outside licensed premises to be smoke-free.
Councillors, Councillor Apollo.
Thanks, Mayor. I just general question. Are we modelling our policy on the experience in other cities? Or do we have any literature that's available for distribution that talks about the case studies that other cities have experienced as they've rolled out this type of policy?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. In terms of literature, we have included references to literature in the consultation report when we have provided direct responses to people's concerns. The policy that we're rolling out is largely in response to the concerns that are being raised by the community. So it's there to basically say, well, we've done the consultation, these are the concerns you've raised, and this is how we'll manage your concerns.
Just to clarify, one part of my question was, are we actually modelling it on other cities? I just want to know if we're pioneering in this space and therefore things like enforcement we're making up as we go because we're leaders in the space, or are we looking at experiences in other places and trying to modelling on that on a case study, for example?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. As part of the design of this policy, we've looked at the City of Perth has done it in the malls, in their malls in the 2010s. We've looked at the City of North Sydney, the City of Melbourne, City of Hobart, and other local governments who have implemented this sort of project.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Manager. We'll move then to item 5.5, variation of license to Bonnie Brew Proprietary Limited, part of Road Reserve adjacent to number 639 Lot 1, Beauford Street, Mount Lawley. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Given that this area remains public land, has visibility access to the deck been assessed, and what was the outcome?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, disability access was assessed by the Rangers team. The manager of Rangers actually assessed it, and he advised that it was adequate disability access once you've got onto the deck.
Was that inclusive of the furniture being in place?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that's correct. With the 7 large tables in place, there was still 1.5 metres between the table and the boundary of the property.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. I think last time when we considered this lease, the item went to Main Roads, who provided some feedback in relation, and that sort of set some of the terms of the lease in terms of it actually finishing at a certain time. And I'm just wondering if this has been forwarded to them this time around.
Through the chair, we'll need to take that on notice. We'll have a response in the briefing notes.
Yeah, thank you. Also, just can I just be advised what the current lease fee is and what the land area that the lease fee relates to?
Thank you. Through the mayor, I'll include that in the briefing notes. I don't have that to hand.
Councillors, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Nicole. So my understanding is that we've given a license over this area and not a lease. And my understanding of the split between the two is that a license is generally over a restricted period, whereas a lease grants exclusive use over a longer period. Do we consider them leaving all of their infrastructure out there outside of business hours a situation that's more likely to be considered a lease rather than a license? My understanding was that I thought we went for a license because they were removing it and reverting it to public open space or public space outside of business hours.
Through the chair, essentially a lease gives exclusive use, and in considering the arrangements and the application from Beauford, that exclusive use isn't considered. It's still open for public space after hours for people to use that space because it is on public open space.
Okay.
Can I just, oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
No, you're still going.
I was just going to ask a more general question about, I think the property management framework got done after we did this license, and seeing as we're taking the time to revise some terms, whether it could be reviewed against the current property management framework.
Through the chair, we can review it against the property management framework in respect to licenses. I'm not sure that the property management framework captures licenses in that respect, but we'll have a look.
Okay, yeah, in the briefing notes would be great. Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just probably a follow-up question to that. Have we had a assurance from the Alford that outside of business hours, the tables and chairs will be available to public? They won't be covered or stacked up or otherwise not available for people to use?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the Alford plans on and has been taking in all the small tables and chairs inside. It's just the 7 large tables, which are very heavy and require a certain number of people to bring in. They're having difficulty bringing those in every night. They can do it, but it's a challenge. So they will be open to the public to use. They're planning on attaching them to the deck so they can't be moved, but the public could stand and have a coffee and talk on the deck under the cover, using the tables to put their coffees on or something. Absolutely, but the chairs won't be there.
Okay, so there'll be chairless tables available for the public to use on the public space after hours. Okay. Can I also just clarify, there is reference in the report to clause 6 of the license. I just want some confirmation that we are confident there's no liability for the city if there's any injuries or damage after hours when people are using those in those spaces, basically.
Through the chair, I'm reasonably confident in that respect, but we'll confirm in the briefing notes.
On this issue of usability and the practicality of this space being used by members of the public in those few hours where it's not open by the Alford, should we make some inquiries about whether they'd be prepared to have some kind of seating that can remain, or do you think that people would actually go into the space and lean on a table? It seems like it. I mean, it's probably more usable than it was when it was just decking. But if the intent, the question is, if the intent is for it to be used by members of the public, should we be speaking to the Alford about having some seating attached to the tables?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So the period of time where that space, where the Alford isn't open, it's early morning, late at night, early morning. It's not a significant period of time. The Elford, though, would have no problem with leaving the chairs out. We've been asking them to bring the chairs in for security reasons, so that at 3 a.m, someone doesn't come and throw the chairs into the middle of the road. So that's the reason that we've been asking to pull them in. They would be very accommodating and happy to put the chairs out first thing in the morning when they get there. They usually start work at 6, 7 in the morning. So they'd be happy to bring the chairs out straight away so people could use them and have a coffee or sit down and just have a chat with someone in that space for sure.
Well, that sounds like something of use to explore. Thank you. Councillor Opolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to know whether there was any consideration payable by the licensee in relation to this variation.
No consideration's been considered in respect to changing the licence fee in respect of the slight variation.
Thank you.
Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, and can I just confirm, is there signage on the decking that is visible without a lot of investigation, that it remains a public space for people to use without having to purchase products from the enterprise?
Through the chair, I'll take that on notice, include a response in the briefing notes.
Anything further? Okay. Item 5.6, extension of lease and deed of contract to Belgravia Health and Leisure Group Proprietary Limited, Loftus Rec Centre, 501 Loftus Street, Leederville. Any questions on this item? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question about the $3 million loan. Can we get some detail about when that will be discharged, and does that align with the proposed lease?
Through the Mayor, we can get a response in respect to that. Do you know exactly? Okay.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, the maturity date for the loan is 1st of July 2027. There is actually a disconnect between the existing lease and the term of the loan, because when it was originally set out by the parties, there would be a 5 and 5 year extension of the lease, and a lesser term was negotiated originally. So that is something that is being taken into consideration as we are discussing with Belgravia whether or not the lease is extended, and whether or not there are any settlement factors if that lease is, sorry, in terms of if after this 12 months, we'll be looking at that in terms of any future business model and future arrangements.
Okay, so there's a possibility that in 12 months we might not have an ongoing lease, but have to settle the deed of contract in relation to that loan repayment.
Correct, yeah. And through you, Mayor Cole, the current value of the loan is $1.4 million. So that's being considered in terms of what the actual business model is for the Loftus Centre, and we'll take all of that into consideration.
Okay, and do you have a timeline at this stage about when you propose to bring it back to council with future management options?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, we're expecting that to be done before 30th of June. And in actual fact, we need to provide a formal notice to Belgravia if we're not continuing and rolling over our lease and our agreement. We need to give them 6 months notice. So there is a very hard deadline there.
Councillors. Councillor Opolo.
Just a more practical administrative one. Given that the lease is in holdover, is there any reason why this extension wasn't negotiated last year before the actual completion?
There was a gap between certain staff that would have been involved in that, and therefore it would have shifted into holdover while we didn't have the technical staff to be able to pursue some of the issues out of it.
Councillors. I just had a question in relation to the repayments. The COVID committee approved that the repayment would be paid over October 20 to 31st of December 21. And the report says that that wasn't because there was negotiations. Just wondering if there was there an incapacity to pay, given that there was a resolution for that payment to be made within that period? And are there other repayments? It's sort of ancillary to this item, but it does raise that that resolution was not met, and there are others that have not made payments within the period determined by the COVID committee.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can't speak to others, but my high-level understanding is that this is the only one of the COVID-related lessees where there is this issue. I don't believe it's further extended than that. And my understanding is that it was simply that the repayment terms were not activated, were not agreed. And that's what this report is seeking to address.
And just a question about the parking licence. Can we have a bit more information on allocation of car bays in the Loftus Centre under the lease or licence? Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on Loftus lease? Okay. Next item is 5.7, advertising of new policy, temporary employment or appointment of CEO policy. Questions on this item? I have a couple. I just wanted to ask about the subdelegation to the Executive Manager of Governance. In a situation where the CEO is unable to appoint an acting CEO, it does seem that something quite extreme might have occurred. And if we're not, putting any persons aside and just speaking in terms of positions, if the CEO was to die, to be terminated, something quite significant, I just wondered the grounds for that not then coming back to council to appoint, given that the circumstances are likely to be more extreme rather than run of the mill, and was a shorter period of delegation considered rather than the 6 weeks flowing through to the Executive Manager of Governance. And I also had a question in relation to the option for CEO to recruit an acting CEO. And given that the decision would have to be made quickly, how extensive that recruitment process would be required. For example, if you consider that there is the example of Luke Gibson coming to act as a director at the City of Vincent, a secondment, if you like, from another local government, these things are perhaps in a different field rather than an outright recruitment exercise. I just wondered whether that contemplated something that might be a halfway measure where you're looking at a secondee, if you like, from another local government rather than having to go through a full recruitment process.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll tackle the first one first. In respect to should something unfortunate happen where the CEO is no longer available to perform the role, the intention would be to try to get an acting CEO in place for the interim, so decision making and the business continuity can continue in respect to the city. If during that period of time, if we found that the CEO is going to be incapacitated for a lengthy period of time, the intention would be for it to go to council to make some decisions. So it's really about trying to make sure business continuity is happening, decision making is still occurring, and in respect to being able to make that assessment of how long that incapacity might be. In respect to a secondment, I haven't thought of that scenario actually in the draft of the policy, so I'd need to consider that and give some feedback into the briefing notes.
Thank you, Executive Manager. Any questions on this item? Okay. Moving then to 5.8, outcome of advertising and adoption of a new election signs policy. Any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Michael. I think I asked this last time and I can't remember, to be honest, if it got responded to. So apologies if it did. I was curious about the extent to which the requirements to erect signs, 50 metres from the intersection of any thoroughfares and more than 120 metres from any signalised intersections. Like by my rough estimations, that leaves maybe 10% of public space that's available. I'm not sure, maybe less. Is admin able to provide any kind of indication of, if this does in fact rule out most of Vincent? And if it does, is it better just to say that we don't want these signs at all, if that is indeed the intent, or do they need to be revised? These distances need to be revised to something a little bit more permissive.
Through the chair, the specifications in respect to the policies takes a lead from the main roads, Western Australia, which has a policy in respect to how they expect signage to be used on main roads under main roads. So we've taken that leaf out. We didn't consider in that how many roads might be excluded, because obviously the city looks as safety being paramount in respect to where those signs go. The intention isn't to exclude election signage at all. That wasn't the intent. It's just being able to manage it and make sure that when election signs do go up, there's a public safety consideration when they are, and that has been the focus. So I guess in summary, based on the main roads policy existing, not looking at excluding election signage, I think there's a place for it, and didn't consider that main roads general rule of thumb policy excluded a fair bit of the city. It wasn't a consideration at the time.
Could I request in the briefing notes that, a small portion of the city, whether it's a few blocks or something like that, we actually do a study and see, because I think most block lengths are less than 100 metres. So if you have to be 50 metres from any intersection, it's going to rule out almost the whole suburb. I agree we can't override main roads in their jurisdiction, but I'm not sure we need to apply those same standards in ours. Not making a statement, the question is coming. Is election signage considered more of a high risk than any other signage we put around? I think about near my house, the intersection of Beaufort and Brew, we have eco signage there right on the corner. It's of a larger format and more drawing of attention than most election signage is.
Yeah,
given
that's
that we
commentary, thanks.
Okay. Round back around, is election signage considered more high risk than any other signage we put in all of these places that are prohibited under this policy?
It's a good question, because the question is there anywhere that you could put an election sign on a main street in the city of Vincent under the existing, any street in the city of Vincent with those requirements? It's a challenge for you, administration.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I just might add the block length on Charles Street, for instance, is it varies, but it varies from 250 metres to 110 metres. So you get little sections where you can, in fact, probably most blocks you'll get a 10-metre section where it would be permitted, and on other blocks you'll get a big stretch of 100 metres or 200 metres where it would be permitted too. So. But we can provide that information in the briefing notes.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this item? Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to the exclusion from parks and reserves, I'm just wondering if you can clarify what the policy means when it says reserves, because that could be interpreted, I think, a bit more broadly than just parklands.
Through the chair, the intention is generally any public open space controlled by the city, in answer to that question.
Does that include verges?
through the chair, specifically excludes verges. Verges are, under the local law, treated differently to public open space. It's actually addressed separately.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay, thank you. Item 5.9, advertising of amended policy, elected members continuing professional development. Any questions on this item? I had a question in relation to sections 5, 6, 7, 8, which is talking about accommodation, travel, cash allowance and accompanying person. Given the City of Vincent doesn't really have the budget or with our current restrictions, the ability to travel, and given the review of the policy happens after every election, general election, ordinary election, are these sections of the policy necessary? And also considering the practice has been that council members have not travelled domestically, let alone internationally.
Thank you, Mayor. I think when the value of having those provisions in the policy is that should an issue arise and for consideration of an application to do that sort of professional development, you've got something to work off in respect to not having any policy provision at all. So I think that provides some value in respect to having it there.
This will be advertised to the community for comment. And just really querying at this time, is that appropriate for us to be advertising a policy that considers council members going on international travel? I guess that might be more of an issue for debate. I'll just indicate that I might flag an amendment to remove those sections and we can debate that next week. Councillor Hallett.
Just partly related to that, I wonder if has admin considered having something in there that relates to prioritising professional development that's digital over travel somewhere in order to limit budget implications as well as environmental.
Through the chair, in short, no, there hasn't been any consideration in respect to digital training versus in-person training. General practice is it's left to the elected council members' discretion on whether in-person training or online training suits their learning style or not.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. Item 5.10, advertising of amended policy, council members' allowances, fees and reimbursement of expenses policy. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. There's a proposed change to edit clause 1.1 on the council member meeting attendance fee. The sentence detailing an expectation that council members regularly attend meetings of council. Are you able to confirm that that sentiment is captured elsewhere, such as the code of conduct or policy document, and how is this enforced?
Through the chair, I'll need to check the code of conduct. I'm fairly sure that there's a provision in there in respect to councillors devoting their time, council members devoting their time to council business. But the best put something in the briefing notes to clarify that.
Councillors, any questions? I'm just noting the report refers to the Salaries and Wages Tribunal. And I don't think anyone in that category is actually on wages. That's having their salary determined.
Thank you, Mayor. That should be the Salaries and Allowances Tribunal.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I did have one question about advertising this policy at this particular juncture, given that the reforms are talking about the introduction of superannuation for council members. and whether there's benefit in holding off on dealing with this until the issue of superannuation has been dealt with through the reform process. I'm just not sure what timeframe that might be.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that is always the challenge. Whilst there is a reform agenda on there, we're not privy of the likelihood of implementation of that reform. And this particular policy is on the policy review timeline, and it just happens to be when it fell. So I think that having to amend a policy after legislative reform is a regular thing anyway, and we'd address it.
Thank you, Manager. Any further questions on this item? Okay, item 5.11, submission on proposed reforms, Local Government Act 1995. Any questions on this item? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I have a question on the last item in the submission, which when I find it, I'll tell you the number. Many pages, 6.8 on the cost of waste service to be specified on rates notice. Just wondering if we can get some clarification on what the reform is proposing. Is it suggesting that councils would be required to have a separate waste charge, or is it simply suggesting that we note the cost of waste services in the rating, in the rate statement?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the way we've interpreted it is that it splits out the waste charge and explicitly shows what it is. At the moment for the City of Vincent, our waste charges are rolled into the rates, and other councils split it out. So I think they want to, the proposal is to make it more visible and consistent across the sector.
Okay, in that case, I'll flag an amendment for our response to that. Those who've been on council with me for a while will know why, but I'll explain more next week.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. I've got a few apologies. Would you be able to clarify whether this submission is for the purpose of the Wowga State Council, for the Department of Local Government, etc., directly, or both?
Through the chair, primarily it's for inclusion to the Department of Local Government, but it would be also for Wowga's submission, for consideration in the Wowga's State Council submission.
Are you able to outline the timeline for developing this submission, the rationale for not including community engagement, and how the positions in the submission were arrived at?
I will need to take that on and notice and put it in the briefing notes. I could probably give a quick off the head response, but I prefer to have my facts right.
No problem.
I think it was the pressing time frame that made it absolutely impossible.
The following can also be on notice as well. Can you provide some commentary on the suggestions from Mr. Main that we develop a policy related to vexatious complaints, and also the proposal of an independent body being established to enable citizens to get assistance if they're having difficulty obtaining a response from their council? And then also, is there a way for the city to also encourage community members to participate in this current state government consultation process? And will there be future opportunities to comment on more detailed proposals from the government?
We'll include that in the briefing notes.
I can answer some of that. My interpretation of reading the document is that the the city's recommended response is that we develop a policy as suggested by Mr. Main, and it is actually the inspector that makes a decision on whether a person is deemed vexatious. And I think the question would be, does the inspector have a role also then vice versa in a community member complaining to the inspector that a council is not providing answers, given that they can deem a community member to be vexatious? Can they look at it from the other perspective? currently those sorts of issues go to the Ombudsman.
That's correct. The intention for the city would be to have policy established in respect to managing vexatious or recreational complainants, and having that based on those policies and procedures that are recommended through the Ombudsman. So that would be our intention at the city. Include the role of the inspector, we're not quite sure what that will look like. And I'm confused about why they would necessarily have an inspector when there is already a parliamentary inspector, which is the Ombudsman that deals with those complaints. So having an understanding of the difference between the roles that might be introduced would be important. And I can't answer that because I don't understand what the difference will be.
Just to quote from the city's proposed response, it says, declaring complaints to be vexatious should in the first instance be determined by the local government. A council policy could determine the parameters for this. The decision could then be appealable to the inspectorate. That's on that one. I know you had several other questions just on that one point.
I guess it says could determine the parameters. And I read it that it could also just be a decision by the CEO.
I think that's the city's feedback on the proposal. So if we wanted to strengthen that, then we certainly could by amendment.
Yes. There is no current policy in place. The CEO has a role in managing the day-to-day business of the local government and the allocation of resources towards responding to complaints. I understand the city tries to ensure that complainants' responses to complainants meet their needs, but sometimes you can't get to that point. And you will have constant requests for the same information that's always been provided. It's always good to have some form of policy in place to be able to manage that, to be able to guide the CEO in determining when someone has got to that point and how we can manage the relationship between the city and that complainant. The Ombudsman has some very good documentation and guidelines in respect to that. And I understand at the city's level, we're hoping to introduce some policy that will help guide that decision making.
And through you, Mayor Cole, just in practice, having a policy in place would be useful because we'd expect in most instances where a complainant was being considered to be vexatious, they would already probably have approached all council members or individual council members disputing whatever an administrative decision or response may have been if they weren't satisfied with that in the first instance.
Anything further, Councillor Hallett? Councillors, any questions? Just to quickly work through, I've got some questions and I'm happy for them to be taken on notice. In relation to the city's comment on the early intervention powers, I found the response from the city a little bit unclear when it talked about minimising actual and perceived bias due to conflict of interest through the complaints management framework. And I just wondered if that language needed to just be a little bit more clear. And it also talks about this measure is intended to improve local government staff and member conduct, which seems to indicate that our conduct is poor and needs to be improved. So I thought that language was perhaps not as best chosen as possible. And then also in that section, it talked about understanding relationships between Inspector, Minister, Director General, Inspectorate, Conduct Panel, Department of Local Government. And I think inserting the words and local government would be valuable. In relation to 3.4 additional online registers, obviously we're yet to adopt this, but one of the recommendations in the same agenda is to have a register of elected member reimbursements. So that could potentially be added. In relation to 3.5 Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicators, I understand the city's feedback there around KPIs that are personal or confidential, and I thought they could best be described as professional development KPIs. In relation to introduction of preferential voting, I'm happy to just flag that I would be happy to put forward amendment to indicate that depending on how the vote goes at the council, would see the introduction of compulsory voting to be, the biggest improvement in community representation. It's not on the table, but it doesn't stop us from putting it forward. So I'm just flagging that I'll do that as an amendment because that's fine. And in relation to 5.5, where it talks about establishing education allowances, that's also pertinent to our elected member development policy, where it does talk about setting amount in the budget. This talks about a defined maximum value. So I think it would be interesting to add to our comment seeking further information on who sets the value and whether it's cumulative. And I think just really picking up on Councillor Castle's situation, we need to understand whether it's a separate waste charge or whether it's just noting the waste component within rates, given that that would have implications for pensioner rebates. And just we need to make sure that that's highlighted in our submission and that issue has been considered by the state government. Any further questions on this item?
Yes, just on the council reforms, I've got some comments. I support Councillor Hallett's comments about lack of community engagement, but I also see this report as somewhat as the administration's report. I would have thought that with something as important as these reforms, that the council would perhaps hold a workshop to work through these things together, to look at what is important, because I know that the council briefing agenda says the risk management implications are low. It's low risk. Who decides that? This is in keeping with the city's strategic plan. There's a number of comments there, but given the importance and the potential ramifications of the reforms, I certainly would have liked the opportunity to workshop it through with all our fellow council members with regards to this. And so maybe I don't fully understand the endorsement going to Wolga. Is that the end of our involvement, or we're not going to workshop it together to see what council members think and put a consolidated view forward?
CEO.
Through Mayor Cole, the state government initially had a very short time frame for responses, which was before this meeting being scheduled, and it's now been extended to the end of the month. We'd be very happy to meet with any or all council members to discuss. It's a long list of proposed reforms. I'd be very happy to meet with elected members between now and the council meeting next Tuesday to discuss and go through some of the thinking and what we understand the intent of the reforms are and what our proposed responses are.
It's certainly to do with the time frame for the submissions being due. That sort of approach would ordinarily happen. I'm also happy to invite council members to attend a meeting. It's just it would have to be before Tuesday because we don't have a council meeting again before the submission is due back to the Department for Local Government.
Well, I'm not sure, just to say that, it's a short time frame, so therefore we've had to do this. So I understand that, but it's a very critical set of reforms. And, they're talking about harsh penalties and all of these sorts of things to change. And, I think it's important enough for the council to workshop through almost every item. Now, it might be just me, but I think this is an item that we shouldn't just kick off and say it's low risk, because I suspect it's not, because
Councillor Alexander, this is sort of debate or putting a view forward. If the question is why, the answer is extremely tight timeframes, and we have had a recess, and this has been raised by the local government sector, and there was an extension given by, was it 3 weeks? But again, short, and still doesn't allow us to have that second council meeting or we're back for the year. I think the best we can do in the circumstances is offer a meeting to council members. It will be tough because, as I say, it's got to be done. So it's really a matter of, do we put in a submission by the deadline because we have a council meeting next Tuesday, and then how do we meet that deadline? Because if we then put it off to a workshop, we've missed the deadline and we're not getting a response in time.
okay, I think it's a critical, set of reforms, and that I'm certainly prepared to put in the time, and I don't support just sending it forward.
Well, that's the sort of commentary for next week. But if we attempt to set up a meeting in the meantime, I think that's a positive action that we can attempt in response to your concerns.
All right, that's appreciated. Thank you.
Council members, anything further? Okay. We'll leave strategy and development for this evening and move to back to infrastructure and environment. Now, this item was not listed on the agenda. Just wanted to ask, we probably should have had it listed as a late item 6.2. And on this item, it's referring back to Britannia. So I'll take this opportunity to declare an impartiality interest that I have declared previously when items relevant to Britannia. Actually, do I need to? This is not Florida Athena. This is actually Britannia Reserve. It's a bit, well, it's a bit of a stretch, but if it makes you feel comfortable, I'm happy to declare that an impartiality interest in that my son, as my dog, and my husband and myself may be shedding light at Britannia Reserve, but the main issue being that my son is a junior with Florida Athena Football Club in the winter season, and they do intend to train at Britannia Reserve. Anyone else?
Excuse me, Mayor Cole, yes.
Previously made a
yes, please.
Partiality wish to.
Previously,
Councillor Loden, I see you, but I'll go to Councillor Castle first.
I've previously declared an impartiality interest on the basis that the president of the Florida Athena Football Club supported my election campaign last year, and so could that be repeated?
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll retable all the impartiality interests from previous items related to Florida Athena Football Club for next Tuesday's OCM, which would include Councillor Loden's involvement with Florida Athena Football Club, which he raised with me before this item was tabled late for the briefing agenda. And I had previously noted that my niece is a junior member of the Florida Athena Football Club as well. So I'll repeat my impartiality interest for next Tuesday as well, Mayor Cole.
Thank you, CEO. I'm not sure if everyone's had an opportunity to read this, but if you have any preliminary questions, please do feel free to ask them. And also, if you haven't had a chance to ask them, please feel free to send emails or phone director during the week. I'll just go back to some of the questions I perhaps asked on the out of session item, which was really around whether we're absolutely confident that we've tested the market as much as possible for the cheapest and best option, given that this is a substantial increase in funding.
Yes, through you, Michael. Yeah, we believe we have. From memory, we had 4 submissions from recognised companies, and we've selected the lowest cost submission from those companies. So we do feel we've tested the market.
And perhaps the other question is, if we didn't light up the whole oval, what would the consequence be if we did go for the reduced 4 areas rather than 6?
So, Michael, my understanding is the community need is there now for the 6, and I understand particularly Florida Athena that have a seasonal booking in the winter and require the lights for training, that they would not be able to accommodate the level of, the number of teams and the level of training that they intend to. There's also a feeling that at some point in the not too distant future, we'd be faced with, if we didn't do it now, going back to look at it again and doing it at a later date, which obviously would add cost. And there are economies to scale to doing it all in one go, which I think is mentioned in the report.
Councillor Hallett. I don't think your mic's on. Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry. If we didn't allocate these funds to the project, where would they be used instead?
So you recall we have no specific location for these underspends at this current time. It would be dealt with as part of mid-year review. Be a council decision if they want to allocate it somewhere else.
So, Director, on the back page of the report, you've got a list of items there. So they're the capital projects that have either come under budget or aren't going ahead. Is that correct?
Yes, we recall we've identified some underspends where projects have finished, and some projects based on where we are with the project that we know that some of that budget is not necessary. So there's a mixture of both.
So where could that sort of just be defined a little bit more, where it's an underspend and that is now clear, or whether it's just a deferral or deemed unnecessary? But if it is deemed unnecessary, is it a deferral for a period of time that will then have to meet that cost in a future budget year?
Yes, we might call. I can add that to the next version of the report.
Thank you. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Can I just ask, before the report's presented next week or in the briefing notes, that can we do a brief review of whether this proposal impacts the sites, the proposed sites for skate park in Britannia Reserve? Appreciating that you're not proposing to change the scope, just the budget. But if we were to reduce the scope, would that have a negative impact on either of the 2 locations that have been discussed? Noting that that's at an early stage as well.
Yes, we might call. I've not obviously got the information at my fingertips, but I'll look into that.
Thank you, Michael. Can we get some indication of, I think the unit is lumens, like the amount of light that this new infrastructure is going to put up? I guess just in light of community complaints we've received at Forest and more recently Weld about the drastic increases in the amount of light that's put in by new light infrastructure.
I think, McCall, we can do that. I can tell you which fields are lit to which lux. It's not a problem.
Lux,
I mean, I could add to that answer if the mayor's happy that the modern design mean that the brightness of light is not really the issue. The way things are modern designed is that the light is kept on the area to be lit, so it doesn't spill. There's no light spill. So the implications on a property nearby is that they won't be lit by the installation. So it's a little bit of a misconception. What they do see is in the distance, they see a glow of lights. As if you walk up to a sports stadium, you can see that they're not actually being lit by the light. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I appreciate that we've got 4 quotes and that more than satisfies our procurement policy. But I'm just wondering, given the amount of money above the original budget it is, and that we already have a request for tender drafted, presumably, is there time over the next week to, and I'm skeptical about the Wolga panel value. Is there time over the next week to maybe make a couple of more inquiries from outside of the panel just to confirm we are getting a competitive price?
So you might call the time imperative is that $500,000 of the budget is a grant which needs to be expended by June. So we are up against it in terms of time. We did use a consultant to advise us on costs and design, etc. And that was the benchmark we used to ensure that it was value for money. As I said, we have selected the lowest cost quote. So it's hard to commit to doing something in a week, especially with the timescales that we have in terms of the grant.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to comment, I'd expect any serious operator of providing sporting light infrastructure, nearly all purchases of those light poles would be local governments to put them on local government parks and reserves and sporting fields. And if a supplier wasn't on the Walga panel, they wouldn't be selling many light poles, I don't think.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I note that one of the reasons it's determined that we should be pushing ahead with 6 fields is the growth in membership of the Florida Athena Club. And I know that they've been doing a lot of work with local schools and growing their women and girls teams. But can we just get some information as to what proportion of the Florida Athena members that would be training in these facilities are Vincent residents?
I'll see what information we have. I think they do a health check and it might be contained in there. So it's not obviously my directorate, but I'll find out what I can in the next week and provide that information.
Councillors. Councillor Alexander.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Look, I congratulate the administration on $320,000 worth of savings. I'm just intrigued about the 100,000 saving in the Leadable Oval electrical. That's a big, underspend or saving. How does that occur?
Yeah, so you might call, I agree, that's, it's a third of the budget. We set a budget of 300,000 and we're close to completion and we'll have 100,000 left over. If you remember that, I think we talked in the past about the difficulty with some of our aging infrastructure, Beatty Park, Grandstand, Leadable Oval, etc., and how difficult it is. I mean, some of the infrastructure there dates back to when it was built, 1962. So it's actually quite difficult to put an accurate estimate in the early stages of a project, and that's why we have a high tolerance of variance. So that's the explanation for why. This has come in, $100,000 on the budget.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillors, anything further? Okay, thank you. Moving on to community and business services items. 7.1, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st November, 30th of November 21. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just relates to, I think there was some expenditure for Beatty Park LED indoor pool lighting. I think it was about 42K. And I just, early in the year, and I've possibly disconnected from the discussions of last year. If I could just get some information as to if that's part of the project or if this is funded under a different element of the Capital Works program, that would be great.
Through you, Mayor Cole, while Beatty Park was closed, we took the opportunity to do some maintenance works, and part of that was to refresh the lighting there. The Beatty Park team used their existing maintenance budget, and it actually improved the quality of lighting and also the electrical efficiency of the lighting, and it was the best time to do it. And so in answer to the question, it was separate to the project.
Councillors, any further questions on this month of expenditure before I move to the next month? Okay, the next month is authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st of December to 31st of December 21. This is item 7.2. Any questions? Okay, 7.3, investment report as at 30th of November 21. 7.4 investment report as at 31st of December 21. 7.5 financial statements as at 30th of November 21. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Can I just get a breakdown of the 375,000? Sorry, it's in the report and I was looking for it in the actual thing in terms of the insurance premium recoups and how that sort of works in relation to revenue. That's why was it higher than anticipated, and is this something that's where we are thinking may continue into the future?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll take that on notice and put in the briefing notes.
Councillors, any further questions on item 7.5? Okay, item 7.6, financial statements as at 31st of December 21. Can I just ask a question in relation to how we're tracking against our capital works budget of 22.4 million with the remaining budget for the December reporting period at 81.8% remaining budget? I probably at this 6-month mark would have expected to see a high level of expenditure given the extent of the capital works program. Is that something that we'll be getting a briefing on at our budget workshop, or is that something we can get further information on? I guess there's that factor, and then there's also the factor that we're now dealing with significant cost increase in projects that have been costed by quantity surveyors, as we've just talked about with the Beatty Park lighting. Do we need to have a specific session where we look at our capital works budget and the impact of rising construction costs and our lack of expenditure of the budget at this particular juncture in the budget year?
So, Michael, I'll do my best to answer that. Yeah, so the next workshop, we plan to talk about the current market, because there are some changes, as we've seen with Britannia Lights, and there are which projects we think are a risk, I suppose. We're certainly looking much more closely at next year's projects, so we're definitely committed to do that. I think there's a budget workshop next Thursday, so we'll discuss that then. Give you some more information. In terms of tracking of the capital works budget, I'll say a couple of things. There is approximately $5 million of that budget, which is multi-year projects. Projects are like Litter Stadium at $3 million, which is in the budget, but will not get delivered this year and never would have been delivered that year. So first thing to say in terms of tracking, we need to take some of those multi-year project totals out to get to an accurate percentage of what we should be delivering. The other thing, there's always a lag in terms of what we spent and what we've committed. So sometimes we order a waste truck and it's $450,000, but it's not necessarily shown as committed at this stage, even though we've placed the order, and it can get delivered currently 18 months after we've ordered it. So there are a few factors to consider in that. Most of the projects are on track. I mean, there are a few that we're struggling with, but in general, what we said we will deliver this year, albeit it is a difficult year to get everything done. So.
Is it possible that could be presented to council in a format that shows, if you remove those 5-year multi-year projects, and we're talking about things like Litter Stadium, which I think we all appreciate, we're getting closer, but it's not going to be built this financial year. Once you take those out, are we able to look at projects that potentially, in addition to that, aren't going to be realised this financial year, and projects where you're forecasting there to be considerable cost increases?
Yeah, through Michael, we can do that. We're already, we meet very regularly, talk about projects that could be delayed and projects where we think the budget is a risk. So we can certainly do that as part of the one of the upcoming budget workshops.
And is it then possible to sort of forecast where we'll be at budget year end in terms of how we deliver against that 22.4 million budget, and which projects we're earmarking that are going to be costly, that we're going to have to start doing the shuffle like we've just done with the Britannia Reserve lighting? I think does it warrant budget review at this juncture? Is it that serious that we should be reviewing the budget?
Through you, McCall, I don't think it is that serious, and we are due to do the budget review at March Council, so we'll definitely pick it up then, the remaining issues.
Okay, thank you. Any information you can furnish in the meantime would be much appreciated. Councillors, Councillor Alexander.
Could I just clarify that you mentioned Britannia? Do we have a priority order? Because they're obviously, overruns because of all the reasons we know. And we're suggesting, to go ahead with 320,000 for the lighting at Britannia. Is that our priority number one? Or should we look at what the position is going to be and then make the decision what we should do with savings?
Yes, Michael, I do take the point, and I understand. The difficulty we have is if we wait for the full budget review, which would contain everything in terms of income we receive from parking, etc., which is due to be reported to council in March, we miss the window to be able to get the project on Britannia Reserve completed in time to guarantee that we would get the $500,000 worth of funding. So that's why we've done a separate report at this point and not left it until budget review in March. It's not an ideal position, but that's where we find ourselves.
No, that's fair enough. I get that. Thanks.
Councillors, any further questions on item 7.6? Okay, thank you. So we've dealt with 7.7 earlier in the meeting. So we move to item 7.8, outcome of advertising and adoption of amendments to the investment policy. Any questions on this item? Okay. So then we move to Chief Executive Officer items, 8.1, repeal of information and communications technology conditions of use policy 1.1.1. Is that the original policy? That just doesn't seem right, that an ICT is the number one policy. Any questions on this item? And item 8.2, council recess period 21 to 22, receiving of items dealt with under delegated authority between the 15th of December to the 1st of February 22. Any questions? Item 8.3, information bulletin. Any questions? Okay, well then that concludes our question and answer session for the evening. So thank you very much, everyone. And I will declare the meeting closed at